roots and radish roots. Today I am inviting you into my kitchen, which is admittedly a little bit of an area for me, or uncomfortable area for me. And that is because we have 5 kids, but 3 live at home and they are all teenagers. And that means that our kitchen is never clean. It is always making something. There's always some sort of noise or dog barking. So I have decided that there will be no such thing as a perfect video inside of our kitchen, and that's just real life. So welcome to my kitchen. Today we are going to be making lasagna from scratch, and one of the reasons that I wanted to do this and then also invite you into the kitchen is that we have a lot of food sensitivities in our family, and one of the things that we really had to learn, and it took us years to learn, is that everyone's food sensitivities, which should have been probably obvious to me, but it took me a while to figure out, are not the same. They're just not the same. So, I mean, like in general, sugar is probably not good for anyone. But when we're talking about specific foods, it took me a while to figure out that it's just not across the board for a family, but also that it's different foods. So for example, our 13-year-old has gluten issues, she has dairy issues, and she has egg issues, specifically egg white issues. She can have egg yolks, but I have to be very careful to separate the yolk from the white. And then the other thing that we had to learn to do is, or learn about, were that she was fine with sheep dairy and with goat dairy, but cow dairy would make her very sick. Until we discovered A2 cow milk and products made from that milk. And what I had learned is that all goat milk is A2 milk, and when we use cow milk, that's A2 milk, and I make things from it, she doesn't get sick. So that means that we make a lot of things from scratch. And that was also important to me because though there are a lot of gluten-free products on the market, and though there are a lot of dairy-free products on the market, they're very highly processed and not natural products, and also hard to work with. I like a sourdough bread, and figuring out a sourdough with completely gluten-free products were very difficult. She is not celiac, but she does have a celiac reaction to gluten. And what we have found is that if we use one specific type of flour, which is an einkorn flour, she can handle it completely fine. That also means that we're making everything from scratch again. So we have sourdough starter, we make sourdough bread. I do not handle gluten very well at all, and I also don't handle the dairy very well at all. Although, I mean, I'm fine with the A2, but I also, I'm fine with eggs. And I have other children who are, besides the 13-year-old, who are not fine with eggs. So it's very specific to the individual. We did a lot of hard work, and it took a long time for us to figure out what we can have and cannot have. But one of the reasons that we do so much from scratch, aside from the fact that I really do love to cook, but you know, I like convenience too. So sometimes I don't really want to make pizza from scratch. I want to order pizza. But the truth is that pizza that we order will make half of our family very sick and feel very bad. So I'm learning what I can make, and I'm also learning to plan ahead and make pizzas and freeze them. And then we can easily have a Pizza Friday where I'm not ordering it out. All that to be said, you know, everyone's food sensitivities are very specific to them, and we have figured it out. We have figured out what causes issues in our family. And so one thing that we're going to be working with today is homemade lasagna with homemade mozzarella and homemade ricotta, and that is made from the A2 cow's milk. It is a raw dairy. It is a raw cow's milk. I have also made I've made the ricotta from goat's milk and made lasagna that way. But what I found was that, first of all, I can't get my hands on raw goat's milk very easily. And using the store-bought goat's milk, just gave it, once we cooked it into a lasagna, gave it a different flavor that half of my family loved and half of my family did not love. And so that's one of the things that I was talking about, that I had to kind of I have to go back to the drawing board and say, okay, how can I recreate this? Because having food sensitivities doesn't mean that you have to have boring food. And I think that that's one of the most important messages that I want to convey, is it does mean more work, and it does mean planning ahead, but it does not mean boring food. And I think, food is very much a part of everyone's culture. And I love to experience and learn about new foods and learn how to make new foods. And so just because we have food sensitivity doesn't mean that it has to be boring food. So hopefully you will learn a little bit about the different types of foods that we're using to recreate, honestly, the same foods that we love. And let's get started. Okay, so the first thing that I'm going to start with is a pound of ground pork or Italian sausage of some kind. It can be sweet, it can be spicy, it can be any sort of ground pork that you want to use. It does not have to be Italian sausage. And then a pound of grass-fed beef. That's another thing too that was specific to me, is that whenever I would make meatballs or meatloaf or something with ground beef, my hands would itch so bad until we switched to grass-fed and grass-finished beef. So whatever, I don't know what was happening there. Clearly I'm struggling with this garlic. But I like regular ground beef just bothers me for some reason. Ground pork doesn't. I don't know what the difference is. But we're going to start with that. There's a lot of ways you can do that. You can turn that into meatballs and then you can put it into your pan. But I like to start with just loose. In fact, I have mine in casings and I'm going to cut it out. I'm going to be using spicy Italian sausages this time, because everyone who's eating the pasta today, or the pasta dish today, likes spicy. It's not overly spicy anyway. So the other part of the recipe calls for 1 onion. This is a massive onion. I'm probably only going to use half of it. So I always think 1 onion is like relative. Like they can be half this size or they can be bigger than this. So probably about half the size of my hand, roughly. 1 rib of celery, and normally 1 carrot, but they're little, so I'm gonna use 2. And, I would imagine I've put together a recipe from my grandmother, and then I've also put together a recipe from a couple other Italian grandmothers who have given me advice. And I imagine that most of the time it's 1 clove of garlic, but let's be real, more garlic, better. Love it. So I'm going to start with my ground beef, and I'm going to start with my ground hot Italian sausage. They're in links. I'm going to cut them out and I'm going to get them browning in the pan. Okay, so we have the meat is cooked and nicely seared. The vegetables that we put in, which I think before I said minced garlic, but when the garlic is raw and pasta sauce, I like it sliced. And that is a matter of personal preference. So do what you wish. Oh, thank you. Morgan's bringing me my herbs from the garden, which I need to rinse. But so that's what I'm about to tell you. Next step is we're going to toss in some herbs. basil, oregano, and rosemary. I'm gonna keep this rosemary whole like this so I can pull it out. You can chop it really fine, you can use dried, you can do whatever you want to. But I'm gonna put mine in like this so that I can let it just flavor everything and pull it out. And considering that it's very early February, I can't believe I'm able to get this from the garden, but that's a win, right? Okay, so what you want to do now is deglaze the bottom of the pan so you can get all the delicious bits that are cooked and stuck down there. And so I normally just do like about 2 glugs out of the wine bottle, but that is roughly about not quite 1/3 of a cup of red wine. And that's what I'm going to use to deglaze the bottom of the pan. I'm going to let that cook up a little bit, and then I'm going to add in my herbs. I'm going to add in a 1/2 cup of tomato paste. I'm going to add in, you can use crushed tomatoes, you can use whole tomatoes. I don't have any home canned tomatoes yet, but just a good plum or paste tomato, canned tomato, fresh tomatoes if you have them. Tomatoes, use tomatoes. And then what you're going to do is you can also add tomato sauce, but you kind of want to thin that down so that it can come back together with all the flavors while it's cooking. And what you use to thin that down can be any sort of a broth. So you can have chicken broth, you can have beef broth, you can have vegetable broth, but you need some sort of a broth to just thin it a little bit so that it's not going to scorch to the bottom of your pan while it's really coming together. And that's it. And then you taste it a little bit and see, maybe your tomatoes are really like a bright tart tomato, not tart, but acidic tomato. So maybe you need to add a little bit of in the flavor or deepen that flavor. Something that can add natural sugars. That's why we add carrots. The other thing is that maybe it's the opposite direction. It's a little bit too sweet. And in that case, you might want to add in a little bit more of the fresh tomato to kind of brighten that dish up a little bit. It's entirely, when I was in Italy and I went to a different restaurant, the sauce was different at every single restaurant. And so make it your own. Make it what you want, make it what you love to eat. But that's essentially it. And we're gonna show you pictures of it each step of the way, but that's essentially it. That's how we make the sauce. And then we're going to bring it together and put it with the pasta, the Einkorn homemade pasta, and we're going to put it with the homemade mozzarella and ricotta and make lasagna. This is a perfect example of what I mean by any type of tomato. So I like to buy the whole peeled tomatoes, and I'm just getting my hands a little dirty and I'm squishing the tomatoes, and then they're like a rough crushed tomato. And I don't know why, but I just really like it. You could put it into the sauce and then use a potato masher and mash them. You could always puree them with like an immersion blender before you put them in there. But I just don't know, like it. So any tomato. If all you have is some diced tomatoes, put it in there because you're going to cook it down and you can create a delicious sauce with any kind of tomato. Preferably a paste, Roma type tomato, plum tomato, but just make some delicious pasta sauce with what you have. You guys, I just asked my 13-year-old to open a can of tomatoes for me, and she did not know how to use a can opener. So I feel like for someone who has a family who loves to cook, I probably have a little bit of a culinary fail there, and I'm going to need to teach her how to use the can opener. And I don't mean the electric can opener. I mean like the normal old-fashioned kind that you just hold down and turn the little knob. We have both, but I kind of prefer the one by hand because limited counter space. I just don't want that other one on the counter. Yeah, so there you go. Teach your 13-year-olds how to use a can opener. Okay, we've got our sauce cooking on low. Between low and, like, for us it would be number 2 because you want it to have a low simmer, but sometimes if I'm on low it's not simmering. Sometimes if I'm on number 2 to 3 it's cooking and burning on the bottom. So just keep an eye on it, stir it occasionally. You really want to cook it like that for about an hour, but check it. If it's still a little too watery for, like, too much liquid for you, cook it longer. If it's getting a little too thick sooner than an hour, pull it off and you're good to go. Give it a taste, see what you think it needs. So while we're waiting, I'm going to assemble, this is the homemade ricotta that we made with the A2 cow's milk. And that's really simple. If you've never made ricotta, there are a ton of recipes you can look up out there, but essentially I do half a gallon of milk, bring it to 200 degrees, take it off of the burner, and then stir in either a quarter of a cup of lemon juice or a half a teaspoon of citric acid. Powdered citric acid that you would use for canning or that you would use for cheese making. And you lightly give that a little stir. You let it sit for 10 minutes without touching it, and then you pour it through a strainer with some cheesecloth and you let it hang in your fridge overnight, and voila. You can have it a little more loose or you can have it like thicker and drier. And most of the time you want your ricotta for mixing into things, so we wanted it to hang overnight. We also have pecorino. And pecorino, if you've never used it, is very similar to Parmesan, but it is much saltier.
Very salty.
And it is, yeah, Morgan can have it. This is one of the first things we discovered she could have. And
delicious.
It's delicious. It's made from sheep's milk. And so that's our substitute for Parmesan in our house. The filling that I'm going to make is very much just, someone told me yesterday that they have a recipe, but it's not really measurements, it's cooking from the heart. And I've watched my family put together the ricotta filling for lasagna for many, many years. And it's just something that you sort of like look at it, cook from the heart, and those are, you know, when it's the right consistency and it's what you want. So I'm going to give you the general ingredients and then kind of put it together, but I don't have any exact measurements for you. I'm sorry. So we're going to start with grating just a little bit of the pecorino, because I don't want a lot, but I want a little bit in the mixture with the ricotta. So
it's probably for like salt purposes.
Yeah, I mean, I want more later for topping, but I just want a little bit. And you do need to watch how much salt you mix into anything that you're putting pecorino in, or it's going to be too salty, because it is a very salty cheese.
Yeah, even Toby's like, oh, that's too salty.
Yeah, everyone, it's delicious, but it's a salty cheese, so just be careful of that. This really looks like it's about, that's probably about a quarter of a cup, honestly.
I've developed a superpower, so it's not super salty.
She's just grown tolerant to it. So what we're going to do is I'm going to break out this, untie my ricotta here. Mm-hmm. And what you're doing is you're just allowing the rest of the whey that's in the cheese to drain through the cheesecloth. And then what you have left is a lovely,
is that why it's called cheesecloth?
Lovely ball of ricotta. Hopefully you can see that right there.
Is that why it's called cheesecloth?
That's one of the reasons you use it in cheese making, but there are many different kinds.
Yeah.
So I'm going to add fresh ground cracked pepper. I have no idea how much, but I love pepper, so a lot.
Just like,
it smells amazing every time. Like, I think oregano smells amazing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to add a little pinch of salt, but not a lot, because again, that's very salty, and I just need a little pinch in there for flavor. I realize there's garlic and various types in this whole dish, but I need more garlic here. So garlic powder, just give it a shake.
Our family loves garlic.
It's amazing.
It's a good flavor.
What's not to love about it?
Honestly.
This is parsley, dried parsley. I'm definitely gonna add like a heaping palmful in there. I'm gonna add in my pecorino. And then the part I'm not gonna have you, I'm gonna definitely work on it, but I'm not gonna necessarily record the whole thing because you probably don't want to stand here and watch me separate eggs, but how many eggs you need depends on how loose your ricotta is. Normally, I would use a whole egg, but I'm not using a whole egg because of what I talked about earlier, that Morgan cannot have egg whites. And they make her very sick. It was really a missing component to why she was still sick, and we just didn't know what was going on.
Because like when you can't have dairy and gluten, you just have eggs for breakfast.
Yeah, right. If you can't have sugar, she was like on a low fat, low sugar, no gluten.
I was eating leaves,
no
basically.
dairy. And I was like, well, we can always make eggs for breakfast. That's a real good substitute.
It's my number one allergy.
But it is one of her top allergies, so along with the dairy. So I'm going to just separate these yolks out, and even when I'm baking, that's what I do. And I substitute usually one egg. If it's calls for one egg, I'll substitute 2 to 3 yolks. And no, that's not the same moisture level. No, that's not the same protein content, but it works. And sometimes you just gotta go. It's better than what I found for egg substitutes. A real egg yolk, since we can't have those, work better than egg substitutes, in my opinion, or my experience. So I'm very careful though to get as much of the white off of this yolk as possible. And I'm probably going to do 3 egg yolks, maybe all 4 egg yolks in there. And I'm gonna mix that up, and I'm gonna set that aside for later. And then on my mozzarella, sometimes grating it goes a lot farther, to be honest with you. But my husband requested sliced mozzarella, so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to slice the mozzarella.
It's probably easier too.
It is easier, but it does go farther if you grate it. But that's an easy accommodation, and I'm glad to slice the mozzarella and put it into the dish.
So how many egg yolks are we doing?
So I was going to do 3, but I have like 1 last egg in here, so I'm probably just going to do all 4. Plus, the ricotta is really dry. Would you be a dear and grab me a fork?
Yeah.
So that I can, and you can save, like I can save these egg whites, and my husband will turn them into an omelet, or you can put them into something else that Morgan will not be eating.
Yeah.
You can put them in the fridge, and
Here,
I've even, like, a long time ago when we would go backpack camping, I would just whisk them up and put in a little dish, and then that's what I would cook the next morning for breakfast. So you can save them and use them in another way, but we're not going to put them in this dish for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
Okay. I think that's probably good. Just check it one last time. Yep, that one looks good. All right, so I'm going to set that aside.
I'm going to just, do you want that egg cart, Mom?
No. This actually can go in recycling. You don't need that one anymore.
Help clean up a little?
Yeah, thank you, Morgan. Appreciate that. So I'm going to mix this up, break it up, mix it up. It's very cold. I should have let it get to room temperature. And then we will have our delicious ricotta filling for our lasagna. And then, like I said, I'm going to slice the mozzarella when the sauce is done. Next step is we're going to be making the pasta, which I'm so happy that I'm just going to be making sheets of pasta instead of actual pasta, shaped pasta. And we will cook that a little bit, and then we will layer our casserole dishes for lasagna.
Yeah, we normally just eat the bagged pasta.
We do use gluten-free pasta a lot. But again, that's very highly processed and we're trying to avoid that.
Mm-hmm.
In case you wondered what I'm doing, I'm grating the mozzarella. I think it will go farther, and I only have one ball because I didn't have enough milk to make two. So this way we can make sure it's cheesy everywhere. Okay, so we're gonna get started on the pasta. And my grandma taught me how to make pasta by pouring the flour on the counter and making a well, putting your eggs and your milk in there and your seasonings, and then start whisking with a fork until it all comes together, which is a beautiful way to do it because then you start kneading it, but it is pretty messy. Not that making pasta and bread isn't messy already, but I'm gonna do mine in a bowl. Part of the reason is because when you're working with einkorn flour, and really any flour, though I've been very resistant to this, einkorn flour is unforgiving if you don't have the right ratio of moisture to flour. And weighing the flour helps a ton with that. This is one version of einkorn flour. And I actually ordered this one from Amazon because I normally order einkorn from Azure Standard. And because of some trucking issues and then weather issues, our order has been delayed by at least a week and a half, and I needed some. This is like, for lack of a better term, like a white flour, and the only one I have right now is more like a whole wheat flour, and I usually do half and half when I'm making a baked product, but I'm making pasta, so I'm going to be using this beautiful, it's very much like a semolina flour. So that's the other key factor in using einkorn flour is this cookbook. Again, I've tried to use my tried and true recipes in the same fashion I would any other flour with the einkorn flour, and it does not turn out, which is frustrating. So don't waste time and money and energy and frustration. I highly recommend this book. And Carla Bartolucci is who wrote the book. She's also who brought the einkorn flour to market so that we can have something that is extremely low in gluten, and that way we can eat it. So there's a pasta recipe in here that I'm going to be using. I made biscuits this morning from the recipe in here, and I did modify it by adding a little bit of sourdough starter to it, but it's fantastic. They turn out fantastic. And again, I tried making pizza dough like the normal way I know I make pizza dough. Did not turn out. I needed to use the recipes that are in here. So if you're someone who has gluten issues and you're going to try einkorn flour, I highly recommend that you get this cookbook because it will make everything that you do a lot easier and less. You'll just be wasting less time, and you won't be so frustrated. I usually just have it's a cheap scale. Like, I think this was probably $10 on Amazon. And it works perfectly fine. I zero out my bowl and I weigh the flour. And I'm doing a double. I'm gonna double the recipe because I don't want to run out of noodles, and then I have to come back and make more. Like, at that point I probably will order pizza from somewhere because I will not want to do that. So I need 384 grams for one recipe, and I'm doubling the recipe. The one other thing that I learned is that I need to, when I zero out this scale, I need to move quickly because if I wait too long and get distracted in the kitchen, it will turn off, and then I will have no idea where I was when I have to start measuring all over again. But measuring the flour, though I was so reluctant to it, it makes all the difference in the world, particularly when I'm making sourdough. I measure everything that goes into it, or weigh it, rather than using a measurement, except for the salt. are egg yolks only because, again, we have someone with an egg white issue in our house. And I'm going to pour a little bit milk. That's A2 milk. And then you just whisk in the middle. So it all starts to come together. Probably need a little bit more milk. Pasta dough should be kind of crumbly in the beginning and then it comes together. At least that's how I've always done it. But einkorn flour does a lot better if it leans towards the moist side rather than dry. And it has a slow absorption rate, so the other factor that like I would normally probably add a little more liquid to this right now, but if I let it sit for about 10-15 minutes, it will all come together and incorporate together. So working with that flour is very different. It's something that you will have a learning curve on, but it's nice to have real pasta and real bread. Okay, so this is, the flour is incorporated even though this is very crumbly. And so I'm going to cover this and I'm just going to let it sit and kind of hang out for about 10 minutes. And then I'm going to come back and I'm going to knead this dough until it is in a ball and ready to be rolled out into pasta. You're still too tall, move over here. Morgan is, I'm very short, Morgan is very tall like her daddy. Okay, so this was resting for 15 minutes. I did have to end up adding a little more liquid to it, but otherwise it's in good shape right now. So we're gonna dump it out and knead it so it's a little bit smoother and get it ready to be rolled out. Then what we're going to do is we're going to, first of all, I recommend following the recipe in the book. Let's start with that. I'm going to dust my counter surface. But once our sheets are ready, we're going to boil them in very salty water for about 1 minute. And then we're going to put them into the lasagna. So you just want to, I don't like wearing a watch when I'm kneading dough, but
Need help?
It is what it is, right? So one of the most important things I could recommend having is one of these dough scrapers. I have a metal one and one of these wooden ones, but just for cleaning up your counter alone, it's worth it. But also, if you have a really wet dough, it's nice to have a dough scraper. It helps you kind of pick it up if it gets stuck down. Adding flour to a dough can make it really dry, obviously, but it can also make it really like stiff when you're working with it, and it seems nice for you to be able to handle it, but your final product just won't be quite as flaky or soft or what you're looking for.
It's more dense.
Yeah, so wet dough is really always, in my opinion, everybody has their own way of doing things, but that's my preferred method, is to just add, you're going to need to add some flour, but try to add as little as possible. And particularly with pasta dough, you want it to be really sticky and smooth is the wrong term, but it's kind of like a ragged, sticky ball, really. Like, look at that. That's kind of perfect right there. So you're going to do this, then you're going to let it sit for about 10 or 15 more minutes again, because resting dough is really important. It doesn't matter what kind of flour you're using. And then we're going to cut it into pieces. I'm going to cover it with a moist towel so that it doesn't dry out. And then I'm going to cut it into pieces and roll it into sheets for the lasagna. And then we're going to boil it. Okay, so I made a double batch of the recipe, and it says that you would make 6 per recipe, little balls or squares or whatever shape you want. But I got 8 per recipe, and that's just simply how it divided up for me. And then the number one trick for rolling out pasta, if you're going through a pasta machine, is to make sure that you're keeping it floured. And I know I said not to add too much flour to your dough, which is true, but you do not want it to stick inside, especially if you're doing a shape or it's cutting something. It'll stick in the tines, and that can be very frustrating. So you want it to be flat. I flour every single pass, to be honest with you. And if you bought real fresh pasta, you would notice it was completely covered in flour, and that's why. And maybe this will work. I don't know why it's not going through. There we go. So we're going to do 3 different passes on this until we get a really, really thin noodle. And then we are going to go, so like I'm going to dredge, for lack of a better term, put this through the flour a little bit. And then I'm going to put it on a towel until we're ready to boil it. And then when I'm ready to boil it, I'm going to boil probably about 4 noodles at a time for about 1 minute. And then I'm going to assemble the lasagna as each noodle is ready. And we will show that assembly once it happens. So again, if you ever forget to dredge, if you've ever had a pasta machine or a pasta cutter and you have not floured it, you know, because it's stuck in there. You know the pain of that. Now, if I were just making some noodles for chicken noodle soup, I would use the same sort of recipe, and I would just roll them out really thin and then use a pizza cutter to cut them really skinny and toss them into the soup at the end, which is delicious, by the way. Maybe I'll make that this week. That sounds good. I'll use a pressure cooker and cook the chicken in the pressure cooker, frozen probably. Use the broth, add in some vegetables and some homemade noodles. Dinner. And that's it. There we go. Now I'm gonna start on the next one. Okay, we have our assembly station set up. I've already had to get started on this because I had to see how I made some pasta that was a little too skinny, and I wanted to see how it was going to turn out. And by the way, did not turn out. Okay, so we have layered sauce, layered noodles. I'm using my favorite little cookie dough, ice cream, meatball, whatever you want to call it, scooper for my ricotta. And I've got my mozzarella, got my sauce, got my husband Sean's cooking the noodles over there. I need to let them cool just a smidge before I can touch them. And we are layering up our lasagna. We should have just enough cheese and noodles because that's how I like to do things. I like to play chicken with how much we have to assemble things with. So again, you're going to cook the pasta. We ended up, instead of doing it on the pass-through on the pasta maker at number 2, like the directions say, we did them at number 4 because they were just way too skinny. And those were the noodles that were too skinny for me to use. But again, you're going to cook them for 1 full minute in very salty water. Always everyone says seawater. That's accurate. You want it to be really salty water. And then pull them out. And we have them on a plate here with a pair of tongs. And as soon as they're cool enough for me to touch, then I'm layering them in here and assembling our yummy, yummy lasagna. And then once this is all assembled, I'm going to cover it and bake it for anywhere from 35 minutes to an hour. It depends on your oven. I'm gonna bake it at 375, and you want your cheeses to all be melted all the way through. And I'll maybe a little brown and bubbly on top. Okay guys, let's see if you can see. I'm sure, hopefully you can see from there, but this is our finished product. Cheesy, toasty, delicious lasagna, super low gluten, A2 dairy, and delicious. So food sensitivities do not mean boring food. And my 12-year-old son says I need to tell you to like and subscribe. So please like and subscribe. Until next time.